I stared at the broken master lock resting on the lip of my chest freezer, the icy fog rolling over my bruised knuckles exactly where the A5 Wagyu used to be. I couldn't make my brain process the empty metal rack. I just kept staring at the frost. That cut was a $3,000 import, wrapped in thick brown butcher paper, sealed and dated. It wasn't just meat, man. It was for Chef Marcus's memorial dinner next month. The guy who pulled me out of the dish pit 20 years ago. The man who taught me how to hold a knife. And now, just a severed brass padlock and a humming compressor. I wiped the condensation off my hands onto my stained apron. The cold air bit into the sweat on my neck. Down the hall, past the laundry room, I could hear it. The sharp, delicate clink of crystal wine glasses. A man's low, easy laugh. And Arabella's voice. She was pitching it high and sweet, using that exact tone she reserves for closing a massive contract. I'm 40 years old. I've spent the last 10 years married to Arabella, burning the hair off my forearms on flat tops and pulling 80-hour weeks as an executive chef. I did it to bankroll her, to fund her high-end boutique wedding planning LLC. I gave her every dime of my salary so she could rent the right office, buy the right clothes, and rub shoulders with the old money in this city. I just wanted to build a life with her. I thought we were a team building an empire together. I pushed through the swinging kitchen door, my non-slip boots squeaking against the polished hardwood of our hallway. The smell hit me before I saw it. The deep, rich aroma of seared fat and rosemary. My stomach actually cramped. There were 4 of them sitting at our custom mahogany dining table. The table my credit score paid for. Arabella was wearing a crisp white silk blouse, leaning aggressively forward. Across from her sat an older, wealthy-looking couple in pastel linen. And sitting right beside them was a younger guy, early 30s, maybe. Slick hair, aggressive tan, wearing a heavy silver watch that caught the overhead chandelier light every time he moved his wrist. And right there, sitting on my good bone-white porcelain plates, were perfect, glistening medallions of Marcus's Wagyu. She had pan-seared it. They were eating it. Arabella looked up when the door swung shut behind me. She didn't flinch. She didn't drop her silver fork. She just tightened her jaw for a fraction of a second, then gave this tight, practiced smile. The young guy with the heavy watch stopped chewing and raised a dark eyebrow at me. I was standing in my own dining room, still in my grease-stained chef whites, smelling like raw onions, bleach, and industrial degreaser from a brutal 12-hour Saturday shift. I was bone-tired. My feet were throbbing. "Oh, excuse the interruption," Arabella said, waving a manicured hand toward me like I was a lost delivery driver who brought the wrong package. "This is Thomas, my husband." She paused. She looked at my stained apron, then back to the slick guy. He's a line cook. He tends to hoard food out in the garage freezer, so I figured I had to put it to good use for our tasting today. You know how it is." The room went entirely silent, except for the hum of the central AC. A line cook. 10 years of marriage. 80-hour weeks standing over blazing pilot lights to pay for the roof over her head, the silk on her back, and the table she was sitting at. And in front of her clients, I was just a line cook who hoarded food. The younger guy let out a short, amused breath through his nose. He picked up his wine glass. "Well," he said, taking another bite of the priceless meat, "he certainly knows his beef." I felt the muscles in my jaw click into place, locking so hard my teeth ground together. The tendons in my neck pulled tight, and my head started pounding with a dull, heavy thud right behind my temples. My hands just went completely numb. The blood rushed out of my fingers. I stood there, smelling the rich crust of the meat I'd been carefully saving for my dead mentor, watching another man chew it. I didn't yell. I didn't reach out and flip the heavy table. I didn't demand they get out of my house. That's not who I am. You learn very quickly in a commercial kitchen that panic, ego, and screaming just cause severe burns. You process the disaster. You assess the damage. You survive the rush. I looked at Arabella. Her eyes locked onto mine. They were completely dead to me. Just cold, calculating glass, silently daring me to make a scene and embarrass her in front of a wealthy client. She knew I wouldn't. She banked on my discipline. I didn't give her the satisfaction of a reaction. I just swallowed the dry, jagged lump in my throat. I turned around on my heels, walked back down the hallway, and went straight out the front door. The heavy oak clicked shut behind me, sealing the sound of their quiet laughter inside. The evening heat hit my face, thick and wet, but my skin felt freezing cold. I got into my truck. The cracked leather of the steering wheel dug into my numb palms. I didn't turn the radio on. I just put it in drive. I drove straight back to the restaurant. I walked through the alley, clocked back in, and tied a fresh apron around my waist. I pulled another 6-hour shift on the line, listening to the harsh rip of the ticket printer spit out endless orders while the grease popped against my bare forearms. I kept my head down. I plated the food. I just worked until my muscles burned and my mind went totally blank. I didn't say a single word to her that night when I finally got back to the dark house and slept on top of the covers in the guest room. I stared at the ceiling fan spinning in the dark. I didn't know it yet, but that piece of meat was the cheapest thing she was going to steal from me. 3 days later, the padlock on my restaurant wasn't brass. It was heavy, state-issued steel. I stood on the cracked sidewalk at 6 in the morning, staring at a red condemnation notice taped to the inside of the glass. The building's foundation had cracked, black mold was in the walls, and the landlord pulled the lease overnight. Just like that, 10 years of building a menu was gone. The air smelled like wet drywall and sour yeast from the dead beer taps inside. I ran a callous thumb over the edge of the notice. I didn't panic. I just turned around and drove home. You don't know what it's like to be in your own house at 2 in the afternoon on a Tuesday when you've worked days, nights, and weekends for a decade. The sunlight comes through the blinds at a weird angle. It highlights the dust. I walked into the living room, my boots heavy on the hardwood. Arabella was sitting on the white linen sofa, her laptop balanced on her knees. She didn't ask why I was home. She didn't ask if I was okay. She just looked up, saw me standing there in my work clothes, and physically recoiled. Her nose wrinkled, like I was a stray dog that had wandered through the screen door and ruined her aesthetic. "I have a Zoom call in 10 minutes, she said. Her voice was flat, annoyed. "Can you not just stand there?" I nodded once. "Restaurant is closed. Lease got pulled." She stared at me. No sympathy, just cold, rapid calculation behind her eyes. She shut her laptop with a sharp plastic snap. "Well, you need to figure that out, Thomas. Because I have a 300-person wedding at the Botanical Gardens this Saturday, and my caterer just breached contract." She stood up. She walked over to the kitchen island, her heels clicking against the floor, and slid a thick aluminum clipboard across the granite. It made a harsh, scraping sound. "You're doing it," she said. It wasn't a question. "You aren't bringing in a paycheck right now. You owe me this. My business is the only thing keeping us afloat." I looked at the clipboard. Then I looked at her perfectly manicured nails. The sheer, incredible audacity of it almost made me laugh. Her business wasn't keeping us afloat. Her LLC was a black hole, entirely propped up by 2 massive personal loans I took out in my name, and a joint credit card I paid the minimums on every month. But I couldn't let the LLC tank. If she breached a major contract, the lawsuits would fall right back onto my credit. I had to protect my own liability. "Fine," I said, my voice completely level. "Hand me the prep list." By Saturday afternoon, my lungs felt like they were coated in ash. They stuck me in a white vinyl pop-up tent in the alley behind the main estate. It was pitched directly on black asphalt. The temperature near the grills had to be hovering around 110 degrees. The air was thick with the smell of burning mesquite wood, hot garbage from the dumpsters 10 feet away, and evaporating sweat. I was working a 6-burner camp stove alone. 300 plates, searing Chilean sea bass, blistering asparagus, managing a massive, bubbling hotel pan of risotto. My white chef coat was completely plastered to my ribs. The sweat pooled at the base of my spine, stinging the chafing rash on my waist. My hands were cramping so hard my fingers kept locking around the handle of my tongs. I just kept my head down, listening to the roar of the propane tanks, breathing through my mouth. Right around hour 8, I needed more ice for the fish cooler. I wiped my stinging eyes with the back of my forearm, pushed out of the tent flap, and walked toward the refrigerated box truck parked near the loading dock. The air outside the tent was cooler, but heavy with humidity. As I reached for the heavy metal latch of the truck door, I heard it. The soft, unmistakable clinking of ice in a crystal glass. And then, a laugh. I stopped. I didn't turn around, but I shifted my weight, looking at the reflection in the polished chrome of the truck's side mirror. They were standing by the edge of the manicured hedges, just out of sight of the main reception. Arabella. She was wearing a stunning, backless emerald dress. And standing right next to her, leaning in entirely too close, was the slick guy from the Wagyu tasting. The heir. The heavy silver watch on his wrist caught the string lights overhead, flashing brightly. I could smell his expensive, ozone-heavy cologne drifting over the scent of the dumpsters. "So," the heir said, his voice low, swirling his drink. "Who's the angry guy sweating in the alley? Your husband?" Arabella laughed. She actually reached out and traced the lapel of his tailored suit jacket with her index finger. "Thomas," she smiled, her voice dripping with dismissal. "God, no. He's just a cheap contractor I hired to handle the grills. He's barely functional outside a kitchen." The heir took a sip of his drink, his eyes scanning her dress. "Good to know. I thought you were married." "We're basically roommates," Arabella lied smoothly, stepping a fraction of an inch closer to him. "I'm very single, actually." My hand was still resting on the metal latch of the ice truck. The metal was freezing cold against my calluses. I felt my heart slow down. It didn't race. It just settled into a heavy, rhythmic thump against my ribs. The anger was gone. The shock was gone. I just processed the raw, objective data of what I was looking at. I didn't drop the ice bag. I didn't step out from behind the truck and confront them. I didn't say a word. I just pulled the latch, grabbed a 20-pound bag of crushed ice, and hoisted it onto my aching shoulder. I walked back into the suffocating heat of the prep tent. I dumped the ice over the raw fish. I kept my head down and plated the sea bass. Let her play the single, successful wedding planner. Let her play her games. Tomorrow, I was going to wash her car, just like a good husband should. Sunday morning, 7 a.m. The sun was already baking the concrete of the driveway, radiating heat through the thin soles of my sneakers. I had the shop vac running, the loud, whining hum vibrating up my arm as I dragged the plastic nozzle across the cream-colored floor mats of Arabella's imported SUV. The air inside the cabin smelled intensely of chemical leather conditioner and that expensive, powdery perfume she sprayed on her wrists before client meetings. I always detailed her car on Sundays. It was just a thing I do. A quiet act of service because she hated driving a dirty car to her high-end venue walkthroughs. And I kept my routine. You don't change your baseline when you're working a problem. You just keep the prep station exactly how it always is. I turned the vacuum off. The sudden silence left a high-pitched ringing in my right ear. I shoved my hand deep under the passenger seat to grab an empty, sparkling water bottle that had rolled near the metal tracks. My knuckles brushed against something stiff. Not plastic. Thick, heavy cardstock. I pulled it out. It was a matte black presentation folder, stamped with the silver foil logo of a luxury commercial and residential real estate brokerage downtown. The edges were perfectly crisp. I just knelt there on the hot concrete, the sweat beading on my forehead, staring at the silver lettering. I flipped the cover open. The first page was a 50-page residential lease agreement. The paper was that thick, expensive legal stock that feels like linen under your thumb. The address listed at the top was a penthouse suite in the glass tower over on the west side. A place that ran easily $12,000 a month. I scanned down to the tenant section. I dragged my calloused, grease-stained finger across the ink. Asterisk primary leaseholder, Arabella. Asterisk. Asterisk co-signer, Julian Vance. Asterisk. Julian. The heir. The guy eating my Wagyu. The guy she told she was single. My chest tightened up. Not a flutter, but a slow, agonizing compression, like someone was pulling a heavy leather strap tight around my ribs. I couldn't pull a full breath of air into my lungs. The ringing in my ears got louder, drowning out the distant sound of a neighbor's lawnmower. I tasted copper in the back of my throat. My jaw locked so hard the muscles jumped. I didn't throw the folder. I didn't rip the pages. I just kept turning them. Slowly, methodically. Page 12 was the financial disclosure addendum. She had to prove income to qualify for a penthouse that expensive. I looked at the attached collateral documents. There it was. Her boutique wedding LLC. She had listed the entire projected revenue of her business as proof of assets to secure the lease. The same business entirely bankrolled by my personal lines of credit. The same business propped up by the massive loans tied directly to my social security number. The business I just spent 14 sweaty hours in a back alley cooking for free, so she wouldn't breach contract. She was leveraging my debt to buy a luxury love nest with another man. I knelt by the open car door, my shadow stretching long across the driveway. I just I couldn't stop looking at the numbers. The sheer, calculated math of it. It was so cold. It was so perfectly, clinically detached. The love didn't drain out of me in some dramatic, sobbing rush. It just instantly calcified. It turned to stone right in my chest. You don't scream at a parasite for feeding. You just calmly figure out how to cut off the host. I pulled my phone out of my pocket. My hands weren't shaking, not even a millimeter. I held the camera perfectly level. I snapped a high-resolution photo of the lease agreement, the tenant names, the signature lines, the financial disclosures. I photographed every single page that tied my credit score to her fraudulent collateral. The digital shutter clicked, over and over, tiny and sharp in the quiet morning air. When I had everything, I closed the folder. I took the microfiber rag I used for the dashboard and wiped my thumbprints off the matte black cover. Every smudge of oil from my hands, gone. I slid it exactly back under the passenger seat, wedging it against the metal track at the precise angle I found it. I closed the car door. It shut with a heavy, solid thud. I rolled the shop vac back into the garage and wound the black cord up tight. I walked back into the kitchen. Arabella was sitting at the island, sipping coffee, scrolling through her phone. She looked up, annoyed. "Car done?" she asked, not even making eye contact. "Yeah," I said, my voice completely flat, pouring myself a glass of tap water from the sink. "Spotless inside and out." "Good," she muttered, typing a text message. I took a slow sip of the cold water. She thought she was so insulated. She thought she was buying a love nest with my credit score, treating me like the hired help while she engineered her exit. She didn't realize I still had the master passwords to every single account that kept her fake empire breathing. Living in the same house with a ghost takes a very specific kind of discipline. You learn to control your breathing. You learn to walk lighter on the floorboards to avoid the creaks. For the next 4 days, I just went through the motions of a dead marriage. I drank my coffee black standing by the window. I submitted job applications for executive chef roles from the small, cramped desk in the guest room. I listened to the shower run down the hall, knowing Arabella was getting ready to go meet Julian under the guise of venue scouting. I didn't say a word. I didn't ask questions. I just sat in the dark, scrolling through the joint bank accounts on my phone, watching the tiny, incremental charges she was making to float her new life. $100 here for a luxury lunch, $200 there for a boutique spa, all of it meticulously draining the resources I had built for us. Then, on Thursday evening, the temperature in the house suddenly changed. I was standing at the kitchen island, breaking down a whole chicken for my own dinner, my hands slick with cold fat. The front door opened 2 hours earlier than her usual schedule. Arabella walked in. She wasn't glaring at her phone. She wasn't rushing past me to get to her office. She actually stopped, dropped her heavy leather tote bag on the bench, and walked straight into the kitchen. She had this soft, almost hesitant smile on her face. The kind of smile she hadn't used on me in maybe 3 years. The kind she used when we first met. "Hey," she said, her voice dropping an octave, sounding exhausted but warm. "Smells good in here." I kept my eyes on the cutting board, pulling the joint of the wing back until it popped. "Just prepping." She stepped closer, close enough that I could smell her expensive, powdery perfume mixing with the raw scent of the poultry. She reached out and rested her hand gently on my forearm. Her fingers were cold against my skin. "Thomas, I know things have been tense," she said softly. "With the restaurant closing. With my business absorbing all our time and energy. I've just been so stressed, and I feel like we're losing each other." I stopped cutting. I wiped my hands on a side towel and finally looked at her. She was looking up at me, her eyes wide, playing the absolute perfect picture of a concerned, loving wife trying to bridge a massive emotional gap. She reached into her tote bag and pulled out a long, heavy rectangular box wrapped in dark, textured paper. She slid it across the granite counter toward me. "I saw this at the culinary supply importer downtown," she whispered. "I know you lost your kitchen, but I want you to know I believe in you. I want us to reconnect. Maybe take a weekend just for us soon. A second honeymoon." I stared at the box. I slowly peeled the thick paper back and lifted the lid. Inside, resting on black velvet, was a stunning, hand-forged Japanese carbon steel chef's knife. An 8-inch blade with a custom olive wood handle. A beautiful, perfectly balanced tool. It easily cost $600 or $700. For exactly 1 second, my chest seized up. My throat got incredibly tight. I looked at her face, the way the kitchen pendant lights caught her eyes, and a heavy, suffocating wave of grief hit me. I remembered the woman she used to be when we lived in a cramped one-bedroom apartment, eating cheap takeout on the floor, dreaming about the future. I actually felt a crack in the ice. A tiny, desperate voice in my head whispered, asterisk, maybe she called it off. Maybe she realizes what she's actually doing to us. Asterisk. Thank you, I said, my voice coming out a little thicker than I wanted. I carefully closed the lid. It's a beautiful knife. She smiled, squeezed my arm, and kissed my cheek. We have an appointment at the bank tomorrow, she said, her voice light and breezy. For that business expansion loan I mentioned. I really need you to co-sign the final paperwork. It's going to secure our future, Tom. I promise. She walked upstairs to shower, leaving me alone in the kitchen. The next morning, the house was dead quiet. Arabella had left early for a client meeting before our scheduled bank appointment. I was standing at the sink, running the warm water, washing the factory oil off the blade of the new knife. The steel gleamed under the water. It was a serious piece of hardware. I reached over to grab the empty box to throw it in the recycling bin. As I picked it up, the black velvet lining shifted, and a small, folded piece of white thermal receipt paper slipped out and fluttered onto the floor. I dried my hands on my apron. I bent down and picked it up. I didn't expect to feel anything, but my eyes scanned the stark black ink, and the air just left the room. The receipt was from the culinary importer. She had paid for the knife using our joint visa. The card I pay the balance on every single month with my savings. She bought my reconciliation gift with my own money. But that wasn't what stopped my heart. Right below the charge for the knife, there was a second transaction timestamped 10 minutes later at a boutique luxury travel agency next door to the importer. Asterisk charge, $5,000. 00 asterisk. Merchant, Alpine Escapes, LLC. Asterisk memo, couples retreat deposit, Aspen Chalet, J. Vance/A. Vance, asterisk. She had used my credit card to book a luxury ski trip with Julian. She was already trying out his last name. And then she walked next door, used the same card to buy me a shiny object, and handed it to me to soften me up so I would sign away my financial life for her penthouse lease today. The tiny spark of hope I felt last night. It didn't just die. It was violently extinguished. The emotion completely flatlined. My chest stopped hurting. The ringing in my ears faded away, leaving behind a cold, absolute silence. I felt nothing but a pure, clinical detachment. I folded the receipt along its original crease. I put it in my wallet. I picked up the sponge and went back to the sink. I washed the blade of that new knife in the sink. It was a beautiful piece of steel, almost as beautiful as the trap I was going to spring on her on Friday. The morning of the bank appointment, the sky was a flat, gray sheet hanging over the city. I was standing in front of the hallway mirror, tying a dark blue necktie. I hadn't worn a tie in maybe 4 years. Usually, I'm in a chef's coat or a faded t-shirt that smells like roasted garlic and industrial degreaser. The silk felt rough and foreign against the heavy, burn-scarred calluses on my thumbs. I pulled the fabric tight, watching my own reflection. My eyes looked tired, but the skin around my jaw was completely relaxed. Arabella had left the house 2 hours earlier. She was wearing a tailored beige suit, her hair blown out perfectly, smelling like that expensive powdery perfume that used to make my heart skip a beat 10 years ago. Today, it just smelled like chemicals. She actually kissed my cheek before she walked out the door. The contact felt like dry ice. "See you at the bank at 10, Tom," she had said. Her voice was so light, so full of absolute, unwavering confidence. She thought I was walking in there to blindly sign away my pristine credit score to fund her luxury penthouse with Julian. She thought the hook was perfectly set. She thought I was entirely blind to the trap she laid. I adjusted the knot at my collar. I didn't feel nervous. I didn't feel angry. My heart rate was holding steady right around 60 beats a minute. You know that feeling when you've prepped a massive dinner service? Every station is fully stocked. The knives are razor sharp. The line is silent. And you're just waiting for the front doors to unlock? That absolute, cold clarity where nothing can surprise you. That's exactly where my head was at. I locked the front door of the house. The deadbolt slid home with a heavy, metallic thud that echoed in the empty foyer. I walked out to the driveway, got into my truck, and put the keys in the ignition. The engine turned over with a low rumble. I didn't drive to the bank. At 9:45, I pulled my truck into the concrete parking garage of a nondescript, brutalist glass building on the south side of town. The tires squeaked sharply against the painted floor. I parked in a visitor spot, killed the engine, and rode the elevator up to the fourth floor. The air in the hallway smelled like ozone from a copy machine and old, industrial carpet. I walked into the law offices of a man named Davis, a quiet, hyper-analytical older guy I used to cook for at my first restaurant. He didn't ask personal questions. He didn't offer fake sympathy. He just dealt in raw facts, airtight contracts, and legal leverage. I sat down in the heavy leather guest chair across from his desk. The leather creaked loudly under my weight. Davis reached into a thick manila folder and slid a heavy stack of documents across the polished mahogany surface. The overhead fluorescent light reflected off his reading glasses. "It's all prepped, Thomas," Davis said, his voice a low, steady gravel. "The moment you sign, I file the formal dissolution of your financial guarantee for her LLC. The credit freezes are queued up with all 3 major bureaus. I have the injunction ready to sever the joint accounts and lock down the remaining liquid assets. It takes effect instantly. She won't be able to pull a single cent of your money." I picked up his black fountain pen. The metal barrel was heavy and freezing cold in my fingers. I didn't hesitate. I didn't think about the 10 years we spent together, or the cramped apartment we used to share, or the wagyu she stole to feed her new boyfriend. I just put the metal nib to the paper and signed my name on the dotted lines. 1, 2, 3 times. The sharp, wet scratch of the pen was the only sound in the quiet room. "Done," I said, my voice completely flat. I slid the stack back to him. I pulled my phone out of my pocket. It was exactly 10:14. 1 minute before the wire transfer for the penthouse deposit was supposed to initiate at the luxury broker's office across town. I knew exactly where Arabella was sitting. I knew Julian was sitting right next to her, checking the heavy silver watch on his wrist, waiting for the dumb, exhausted line cook husband to walk into a bank branch and blindly fund their new life. I unlocked my phone and opened my text messages. I had pulled Julian's personal number off the LLC's emergency contact sheet 2 days ago. I created a new message. I didn't type a greeting. I didn't type a threat. I didn't type a single, emotional word. I mean, why would I? He wasn't an enemy anymore. He was just a variable in the equation. I tapped the attachment icon. I selected the PDF file I had meticulously compiled last night, the exact, unarguable ledger of Arabella's hidden business debts. The maxed-out corporate credit cards, the leveraged, high-interest loans, a clean, $150,000 black hole. It was pure, undeniable proof that she wasn't a wealthy, elite wedding planner. She was entirely broke, and she was using his status and old money just as much as she was using my pristine credit. I stared at the screen for half a second. My thumb hovered over the send arrow. The screen's blue light reflected off the polished wood of Davis's desk. I pressed send. The little blue status bar shot across the top of the screen. Delivered. I set the phone face down on the desk. Davis was watching me quietly over the rim of his glasses, his hands folded neatly over the documents I just signed. I knew exactly how it was playing out in that broker's office. Julian's phone would vibrate on the heavy glass conference table. He'd open the PDF. He's a guy from old money. He knows exactly how to read a balance sheet and spot a liability. He would see the massive financial sinkhole sitting right next to him. He'd realize Arabella was a parasite about to tank his own reputation and drain his accounts. He wouldn't yell. Guys like that don't make a scene. They just stand up, button their tailored coats, and walk out, leaving her completely alone at the table with the broker, with no money, no lease, no cover story, and a stack of bills she could never pay. At 10:17, my phone buzzed against the wood. A harsh, vibrating rattle. Then it buzzed again, and again, and again. I didn't pick it up. I just sat back in the leather chair, closed my eyes, and breathed in the smell of the ozone and the old paper. The deep, agonizing tension that had been gripping my neck for the last 48 hours finally, completely released. My phone rang 30 times in 10 minutes. I just let it ring. The math was finally done. 90 days. That's exactly how long it takes for a life to completely reset if you actually sever the infected limb instead of just wrapping a bandage over it. I wiped down the stainless steel prep counter of my food truck with a clean rag. The salt air coming off the ocean was thick and warm, mixing with the heavy, rich smell of caramelized onions and charred citrus roasting on the flat top. It was a Tuesday afternoon. The lunch rush had just died down, and the cash drawer was heavy. No silent investors breathing down my neck. No massive overhead. No 80-hour weeks burning myself alive to pay for custom mahogany dining tables and silk blouses. Just me, a 20-foot aluminum box, and a line of people waiting for my food. I grabbed a cold bottle of water from the under-counter fridge and pressed the frosted plastic against the back of my neck. The condensation dripped down my collar, cooling the sunburn I was starting to get. I felt light. That's the only word for it. The crushing, suffocating pressure that used to sit right in the center of my chest for the last 10 years was just completely gone. I never spoke to Arabella after that Friday in Davis's office. I didn't need to. I let the lawyers handle the autopsy. She tried to show up at the house once, 3 days after the joint accounts were legally frozen, screaming and pounding her manicured fists on the locked front door. I didn't open it. I didn't yell back. I just stood in the kitchen, drinking a glass of tap water, watching her through the front window until she finally exhausted herself, got back in her car, and drove away. From what Davis told me during the final asset split, it all went down exactly how the math dictated it would. Julian walked out of that broker's office the second he opened my PDF. Guys like him don't do liabilities, and they definitely don't fund failing businesses. Worse for Arabella, his family was old money. They talk at their country clubs. By the end of the month, her name was absolute poison in the elite wedding circuit. Every high-end florist, caterer, and venue blacklisted her LLC. Her contracts dissolved overnight. The income stopped completely. Without my credit lines to float the illusion of her wealth, the debt swallowed her whole. She had to liquidate the business just to avoid immediate civil fraud lawsuits from the vendors she stiffed. I heard through an old pastry chef of mine that she's renting a cheap, damp studio apartment out by the airport now, driving a 10-year-old sedan because the imported SUV got repossessed by the dealership. I don't feel a sick sense of joy about it. I don't sit out here on the beach and gloat. I really don't. Gloating takes energy, and she isn't worth the calories anymore. It's just simple, cold cause and effect. A parasite can't survive once you detach it from the host. It just starves. I tossed the empty water bottle into the recycling bin. A young couple walked up to the order window, shaking sand off their flip-flops, looking up at the painted menu board. I smiled, pulled a fresh pair of black nitrile gloves out of the box, and snapped them over my wrists. "What can I get for you folks today?" I asked, my voice loud and clear over the sound of the crashing waves. I turned back to the grill and threw a heavy block of butter onto the hot steel. It hissed and popped, melting instantly into a golden pool. I picked up my tongs. I didn't think about the stolen Wagyu. I didn't think about the luxury penthouse she never got to live in. I just looked out at the deep blue water, listened to the steady sizzle of the grill, and went back to work. Finally, cooking for myself.